Good afternoon, everyone. The meeting will come to order. This is the regular meeting of the Land Use and Transportation Committee. I'm Supervisor Malia Cohen, chair of this committee. To my right will be appearing soon Supervisor Scott Wiener, and to my left is the vice chair, Supervisor Jane Kim. Our clerk is the talented Miss Andrea Osbury. I also would like to recognize the gentlemen Jesse Larson and Jonathan Gumwalk, who will be televising this committee meeting on SFGov TV. Madam Clerk, do you have any announcements for us today?
Yes, please silence all electronic devices, and completed speaker cards and copies of any document should be included as part of the file and submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today may appear on the April 21st, 2015 Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
All right, thank you very much. All right, excellent timing. Excuse me, sir. Thank you. All right, Madam Clerk, could you please call item number 1?
Item number 1 is an ordinance amending the Transportation, Police, Administrative, and Business Tax Regulation Codes related to motor vehicles for hire.
All right, thank you very much. And Supervisor Wiener is the author of this item, and he has joined us. Please, Supervisor Wiener, share with us about item number 1.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for hearing this item. Item number 1 is an ordinance relating to regulation of the taxi industry by the MTA. The MTA did recommend this legislation to us, and we are considering it today. The legislation will do several things. First, it repeals outdated provisions of the police code in keeping with the MTA's regulatory oversight of the taxi industry through the transportation code. Colleagues, as you may know, the taxi industry for many years was governed under the police code, and then it was transferred to the MTA's jurisdiction via the transportation code. The legislation will also make the MTA's investigative process around taxis more efficient and expeditious, and will also improve the MTA's ability to enforce the various rules relating to the taxi industry. So the legislation is it's straightforward. It is really more of a cleanup and reorganization than anything else, and I ask for your support. We do have Kate Torin from the MTA, the Deputy Director of Taxis and Accessible Services, who's here to make a brief presentation.
Hi, good afternoon, Supervisors. Kate Torin, SFMTA, Taxis and Accessible Services. And this legislation has been a long time coming, so we're really thankful that it's here, and we're thankful to Supervisor Wiener for carrying it forward. And yes, this is mainly a cleanup piece of legislation. And prior to 2009, the jurisdiction of motor vehicles for hire was under the authority of the police code, and all permits and enforcement was done by the SFPD. And to this day, you can still find the rules under Article 16 of the police code. After 2009, the MTA assumed exclusive authority to regulate taxis and created an entirely separate code with enforcement to be handled by the SFMTA. The SFMTA rules are under Article 11 of the Transportation Code. Currently, you can read both of these code sections, and a lot of it will have duplicative rules as well as some inconsistent rules. And because motor vehicles for hire are no longer under the jurisdiction of the police, we're requesting that the Police Code Article 16 be repealed with this legislation. Additionally, the proposed legislation would authorize the MTA to subpoena witnesses, documents, and records as needed in administrative proceedings for enforcement of taxi regulations. Operating without a permit penalty for police. Operating without a permit under Article 7 of the Transportation Code is considered a misdemeanor. However, this section is enforced by the police with the fine being up to $1,000. The administrative penalty for the same violation is $5,000, and so the ordinance would bring these more into alignment with the police fine going, first time offense going to $2,500 and the second offense going to $5,000. New misdemeanors. The legislation will make it a misdemeanor to operate a taxi on the street without a functioning taximeter. It will also be a misdemeanor for a limo holder to refuse to produce a waybill by a police officer or an SFMTA investigator. And the parking citations are proposed to change. We've asked to strike the specific enumerations and left general language allowing Director of Transportation to identify staff and provide authority to staff to implement the parking laws and regulations under the vehicle code. What took so long, we had an issue related to the Board of Permit Appeals. There was two outstanding lawsuits against the MTA that UTW was party to, and UTW asked us to pause moving this item forward until the resolution of the lawsuits. Those have been resolved, and the jurisdiction of the Board of Permit Appeals it's clear that the MTA is not required to go to the Board of Permit Appeals to hear individual permit cases, but the MTA, because it is a legacy procedure, the MTA will continue to go to the Board of Permit Appeals for those individual permit cases. And if the MTA does decide that it wants to shift away from going to the Board of Permit Appeals, we are committed to having a public process regarding that. So that's my report today. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim has a question.
Thank you. This is largely straightforward, but I just had a couple of questions about some of the amendments that I read, and I only ask this because I know now motor vehicle for hire is becoming a more broad and confusing term because we have other entities that are called rideshare that's now regulated by the CPUC, as well as limousines, obviously. Mm-hmm. So I had two questions. One is, you said that if a limousine driver couldn't produce a waybill, so they're not regulated by MTA, but you do have some authority.
Right, exactly. We have the authority, and that's already existing, to request that waybill. So that authority would not be new.
And what is a waybill?
It's a waybill. It could be either a piece of paper or it could be electronic that gives the trip information. And the significance of that and requesting the waybill, it shows that the trip would have been prearranged. And the distinction between a taxi and either a TNC or a TCP is that prearrangement.
I see.
So by requesting the waybill and either showing the phone or the piece of paper, it shows, yes, this trip was prearranged and thus an allowable type of trip for me.
Right, for a limousine that's regulated by the CPUC and not
Right.
MTA, but it's to ensure that they're not doing
street hails. This is about street hails, yes.
And so then, and I understand that this primarily impacts taxi cab drivers, right, under the jurisdiction of SFMTA. But I guess what really confused me was then on page 5 when you define what a motor vehicle for hire is, that a motor vehicle for hire, when not capitalized, shall include any taxi cab, limousine, or other privately owned motor-propelled passenger-carrying motor vehicle for hire, regardless of whether the city and county has issued or could issue a permit for that vehicle. And when I read that, to me, that means that you can include rideshare within the definition of motor vehicle hire. So in redefining that term, what impacts does this legislation have on that category, if any?
Right. Now, my understanding, that's not a redefinition. I believe you could find that in the police code as well. So if I go back to the police code, I'm pretty sure, and I'd have to go back to check to be 100%, but I'd say I'm 95%. That's the same language that's in the police code. So the same definition. So although the landscape is changing now, a lot of these issues have been defined prior.
Okay.
So if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's an amendment within, the definition is an amendment within the code.
Yeah, so it's
like
bringing it over
Okay.
into our code, into the transportation code. Yes.
But nothing in these amendments beyond the definition kind of getting reinserted in a different place in the code actually impacts these other types of motor vehicle for hires. Are there specific
only that
things
are specifically enumerated, like the waybill, like when you read about the waybill, that being a misdemeanor, that would impact a transportation network company vehicle, or a TNC, or a TCP, a limo.
So what you can enforce against TNC is whether they did a street hail.
Exactly, that's correct.
Okay, and so that's when you ask a limo driver for a waybill or a TNC for a waybill, all you're clarifying is that neither of them got a street hail.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Thank you so much for the clarification.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Supervisor Wiener? Okay.
I think at this point we're ready for public comment.
Sounds good. We'll go to public comment on this item. Just as a reminder, folks, there is a 2-minute public comment time limit. You first will hear a soft bell indicating that there is 30 seconds left of your time. Public comment is now open.
Good afternoon, Supervisor Scott Wiener, Supervisor Michael, and Supervisor Jane Kim. This early morning, just when the gate or front door of the City Hall opened at 8 o'clock a.m. in the morning, I distributed all this important piece of my 3 hours earlier translation work of writing, holiness in writing. And in the meanwhile time, my missionary work goes in focus on my girlfriend and wife. She works in Chinatown, 83 Grand Avenue, the big jewelry store. And also thank a lot to the mayor, Ed Lee, providing such a beautiful, good public restroom in the Portsmouth Square park right next to my girlfriend and wife's jewelry store at 83 Grand Avenue. And this, we even have the water fountain to refill lots of people water bottle. Very good facility. I really thank lots for the public work of the mayor, for the park of the San Francisco Chinatown. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there another speaker?
Thank you. My name is Mark Gruberg. I'm with the San Francisco Taxi Workers Alliance and formerly with United Taxi Cab Workers, and I'm actually here speaking for United Taxi Cab Workers. Just to briefly touch upon Supervisor Kim's question, we do believe that the City of San Francisco does have regulatory authority over the TNCs and that it should exercise that authority. But that's a whole larger question. As far as this legislation is concerned, Deputy Director Toren is correct. The hang-up here was over the ability of drivers and the public to go to the Board of Appeals to appeal decisions regarding both individual permits and the issuance of new permits. And after a couple of lawsuits and the resolution of those lawsuits, we do have an agreement with the MTA that in terms of any individual appeals or appeals by individuals on permit issues, that they would retain the right to continue to go to the Board of Appeals, that there would be a public process before any of that was changed. And we have also retained the right to bring these issues up in future litigation if necessary. So on the other hand, the appeals of the issuance of new permits would not be covered by that. So that is something that would be eliminated by these changes. I have one small bone to pick here, and that is in the section about taxi meters. An inaccurate taxi meter could result in a criminal penalty, and we feel that the word knowingly or known to the driver should be inserted somewhere in that section, which is...
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on item number 1? Okay, seeing that. Item number 1, public comment is closed. Supervisor Wiener, are there any last comments?
No, Madam Chair, I would just ask that the committee forward this item to the full board with positive recommendation, and that will be my motion.
All right, motion made by Supervisor Wiener for positive recommendation to move forward, seconded by Supervisor Kim. And without objection, this item passes. Madam Clerk, could you please call item number 2 and 3 together?
Yes. Item number 2 is a resolution supporting the designation of the Bay Water Trail as a priority conservation area. And item number 3 is a resolution authorizing the nomination of 4 new priority conservation areas.
Thank you very much. Both Supervisor Mar and myself have been working with various departments and organizations on this issue, and we introduced two separate items. However, after conversations with one another and the planning department, it makes sense for us to move together forward with one resolution that captures all of the city's priority conservation areas. So I've circulated some amendments to item 3, which incorporates the text and intent of item 2 so that we can move forward with one item stating all of our priorities. These amendments also include some cleanup changes proposed by the City Attorney's Office. And after the presentation and public comment, I'll be asking you guys to make these proposed amendments. The Association of Bay Area Government, which is a body that Supervisor Mar and Supervisor Kim both serve on, and I was a previous member in service, developed a designation of priority conservation areas so that the cities and nonprofit organizations who work on the conservation of these areas can apply for state and federal funding. I've been working with the California Coastal Conservancy on the Bay Area Water Trail, a project that spans several counties and helps support and expand public access to the Bay. Specifically, the Bay Area Water Trail is a network of current and proposed sites all along the San Francisco Bay that allow non-motorized small boats. Many of these sites are in the southeastern portion of the city, an area that doesn't have many safe and developed sites for residents to have access to the waterfront. Improvements to this network of sites will help increase the educational as well as recreational benefits to our residents. The San Francisco Bay is one of our region's greatest assets, and we should be working to get together to ensure that it is preserved and that all of our residents have an opportunity to enjoy and learn from it. We will first hear from Ms. Ann Buell of the Coastal Conservancy, who will briefly share with us a few words with the committee about the Bay Area Water Trail. Thank you for being with us. I know you're a little under the weather, so your remarks can just be very brief.
Okay.
And then next we'll hear from Nick P. from Supervisor Mar's office, who's been working on the other priority conservation areas, as well as the planning department. And my apologies to Nick for not being able to pronounce his last name. But Ms. Buell, why don't you continue with your presentation?
Okay.
Thank you.
You very much, Supervisor Cohen. You've covered some of the initial points that I wanted to make sure that everybody knew what the San Francisco Bay Area Water Trail is, so thank you very much for that. The Coastal Conservancy is the lead for this project, and we work in close collaboration with the Association of Bay Area Governments, BCDC, and the Division of Boating and Waterways at state parks. And the Conservancy intends to nominate the entire Water Trail program by May 30th for a PCA designation as a regional recreation asset to the Bay Area. There are many benefits that come with designation as a PCA, and there are many benefits that the water trail brings itself. So the two work together very well. I want to highlight just three very quickly. One is in the area of health and education, one is regional planning, and the third is in funding, and Supervisor Cohen touched on two of these already. With regard to health and education benefits, the water trail encourages public health through access to the bay for use of non-motorized small boats, such as kayaks, windsurfing, stand-up paddling, and other team sports like whale boating, for example, dragon boating. We provide information through our website, a brochure, and educational signs that go up at all sites that have been designated. Our information also promotes safe personal boating habits and protection of wildlife. With regard to regional planning, all decisions about designating sites within the Water Trail program itself happen at quarterly public meetings. At those meetings, we've already established a forum to which planners can bring early designs for water trail sites to a group that's very well versed in what works and what doesn't work along the shoreline. So far, there have been 3 representatives from San Francisco to talk about Crane Cove Park, Treasure Island, and India Basin. And thirdly, funding the PCA designation for the water trail would make potential and designated water trail sites eligible for federal funding. The water trail program also has its own state originated funding, but the water trail program funding is only for capital outlay projects, and the PCA funding would have a broader scope. There are 13 sites in San Francisco, and they're on the map that I provided to the supervisors and on our website. In clockwise order around the north and southern waterfront of San Francisco, they include Crissy Field, Marina Green, Aquatic Park, Pier 39, Treasure Island, Pier 1.5, South Beach Harbor, Pier 52, Mission Creek, Islais Creek, India Basin Shoreline Park, Crane Cove Park, and Candlestick Point State Recreation Area. A PCA designation from the City and County of San Francisco would make all of these sites part of the Water Trail PCA. If in other counties, if a jurisdiction objected, only the sites in that particular city or district wouldn't qualify, but in the City and County of San Francisco, it's all together, and it would be very beneficial. I would welcome any questions if you have any.
Thank you. I don't see any questions so far. So why don't we go ahead and bring up Peter, who's going to speak on this item on behalf of Supervisor Mar.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Peter Lodborn on behalf of Supervisor Mar. So in 2007, there were 4 priority conservation areas, or PCAs, submitted to ABAG. These areas were nominated with minimal input from the city and its agencies. These were the Palouse-Phelps Natural Area, Bayview Radio Property, Aqua Vista Twin Peaks, and Sutro Tower. In November 2014, the Board of Supervisors authorized the Planning Department to nullify these PCAs and conduct a more comprehensive study on the PCA program to determine what San Francisco's new PCA should be. Beginning in January 2015, the Planning Department, Department of the Environment, Recreation and Parks Department, as well as nonprofits, including the Greenbelt Alliance and the California Native Plant Society, began their work. And their goal was to bring a science-based approach with hands-on and observational work to go along with the policy support found from the Planning Department and Rec and Park. The new areas incorporate all of the original areas while expanding their scope to be more inclusive of the surrounding natural areas, while also capturing some entirely new areas. And these are, again, the Palouse-Phelps Natural Area, Bayview Hill Natural Area, which the name was changed from the previous incarnation, Green Connections at McLaren Park, and the Crosstown Trail. And so now I'm going to invite Matthew Dito from Planning.
Thank you. Welcome, Matthew.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Matt Dito, Planning Department staff. First, I just want to thank Mr. Latterborn for that summary of the work we've done, and Supervisor Mar and his staff for their work moving this forward, and as well as Roger Kim in the Mayor's office. Without taking too much time, I wanted to go over briefly the goals of the Priority Conservation Program and why we selected these 4 areas. The program's meant to protect areas of ecological importance which face high risk from factors such as urban development and areas that also lack funding to help support and preserve them. So we feel that these 4 areas we selected all face those threats. It was important to the working group to find areas that everyone agreed were at risk. So some of the things we looked at were observations of the conditions from the Native California Plant Society, data about heat islands and bird refuges from the Greenbelt Alliance, biological diversity maps and information from the Department of the Environment, and the Recreation and Parks Department provided information on the work they have going throughout the city in various parks. And additionally, we wanted to focus on making sure the areas we picked matched up with policies the city's adopted in recent years. And some of the policies that are reflected in these new areas are the Green Connections program, the recreation and open space element of the general plan, and areas included in Recreation and Parks Natural Areas program. One thing I wanted to note about the program is that it doesn't carry any land use restrictions or development restrictions. It just simply opens up a source of funding for these areas to submit projects when the call opens up through ABAG. It's not a lot of money. It's approximately $5 million in a competitive grant cycle, but it's a good way to help ensure support for these areas and bring a focus to them to say that we do have some really important natural areas amidst all this urban development going on. So that concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see, colleagues. Well, seeing that there's no questions here, I think what we should do is go to public comment at this point. Are there anyone in the chamber that would like to speak on items 2 and 3? If so, please come up. If you'd like to speak in public comment, please come to the podium and speak.
Again, good afternoon, Supervisor Scalvin and Supervisor Merkel and Supervisor Jane Kim. I mean, in terms of missionary work, I mean, it all related to mission of quick mercy, mission of quick grievance, of holiness for all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak on and only on items 2 and 3? All right, seeing that public comment is closed on this item. Thank you very much. So what I'd like to do, colleagues, is first make the first motion that we adopt the proposed amendments to item number 3. The amendments are not substantive and they don't require a continuance. Is there a motion? Motion made by Supervisor Kim, second by Supervisor Weiner. The motion passes. Thank you. The next motion that I'd like to make is that we move item number 3 as amended to the full board with a positive recommendation and table item 2. Motion made by Supervisor Kim, seconded by Supervisor Weiner, unanimously accepted without objection. You ready? Yes. All right. Could you please bring to us? Could you please bring item number 4?
Item number 4 is the ordinance amending the administrative code to modify the calculation for relocation payments to evicted tenants.
Thank you very much. Now, Supervisor Campos is the lead for this item. I was told that Supervisor Campos would have a representative here. Okay. Let's see. Why don't we? Yes. Why don't we come back to item number 4 and let's call item number 5.
Item number 5 is a hearing on delivery of Vision Zero and street safety project.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Weiner is the author of item number 5 and has a short presentation for us.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This hearing, a hearing that we had called for late last year, is to make sure that we as the Board of Supervisors are exercising oversight over the Vision Zero program. Of course, this board adopted Vision Zero as a city policy some time ago to put us on track of ending deaths on our streets. We know that as a growing city, we have more use of our streets, whether pedestrians, vehicles, cabs, rideshare, muni buses, other shuttles, cyclists, and so forth. And we have to work very, very hard to ensure that as we grow as a city, as our streets continue to see more and more usage, that we are designing them in a way and educating people and enforcing the law so that we do not see a continuing escalation of collisions and injuries and deaths. We have too many as it is, and the last thing we need is for it to get worse. We need for it to get better, and we want to be very aggressive in moving in that direction. And so Vision Zero is moving forward, and I know this board has been very supportive, and Supervisor Kim chairs our Vision Zero committee on the Transportation Authority. I want to thank her and her office for their work. But we want to make sure that particularly that the project delivery around Vision Zero is moving forward in a good way, and that we are exercising the necessary oversight and accountability to make sure that it does so. And so today we're going to be hearing from the MTA particularly about how it is ensuring efficient and effective project delivery. I know there have been some real challenges in getting projects delivered in an expeditious way, and I know the agency is working to improve the process so that we can have safer and safer streets. I want to note that there is a delegation in San Francisco, or will be in San Francisco tomorrow, from the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration and the State Office of Traffic Safety to take a look at how San Francisco is delivering projects. And so we look forward to that visit. And so Tom McGuire from the MTA is here, who will be presenting. So Mr. McGuire.
Okay, good afternoon, supervisors, and thanks for having us here today to talk about the important topic of how we deliver the on-street projects that are so important to Vision Zero. It was so good to see so many of you out last Thursday at Walk to Work Day and to hear your comments about how important it is to make this great walking city as safe as possible for pedestrians. Your colleague, Supervisor Yee, said that pedestrian safety is a privilege, is a right, not a privilege, and I think it's a great framework for today's discussion. As you know, you've been following our progress. You've been an important part of our progress. Vision Zero is about guaranteeing that right to safe streets by ending traffic deaths on the streets of San Francisco by 2024. And we're focusing our efforts around what we call the E's: education, enforcement, evaluation, and most important for today's discussion, engineering. So we focus on the project delivery side of engineering. So this is the part that says we know what we want to do. We have a program of improvements, and we even have the funding support to get there. But how do we actually get those things built on the street? I think the first topic I want to really talk to you about and put at the front of everyone's mind is coordination, the importance of coordinating to make sure that our projects are done as effectively as possible. This is a complex city. The streets are complex. The infrastructure that we own and we're managing is complex. So just having a project funded, just having even political support for a project is not enough. Successfully delivering engineering projects in the streets in San Francisco requires good coordination, and that's true on Van Ness, it's true on Lombard Street, it's true on Polk Street. I think Polk Street's actually a good example of a place where we probably have a good story to tell about coordination in spite of some of the challenges we had in reaching consensus and reaching public acceptance with the engineering measures that we were choosing to move ahead with on Polk Street. I think we did a good job of making sure that the Public Works repaving, the PUC's sewer replacement project, and the traffic and pedestrian and bike safety projects that MTA scoped are being managed and will be delivered in a coordinated and as a single package. So we'll be ripping up Polk Street, but we'll only be doing it once. And when we're done, we'll have a complete and safer street, one that meets all of our goals for our infrastructure in the 21st century. I also want to say that while Polk Street will be a complex construction project, when the capital construction starts next month, we're not waiting to deliver some of the short-term safety improvements that we know we need on Polk Street. So if you've been out on the street in the last couple of weeks, we've painted new bike lanes, we have painted safety zones and bulb outs, and we have high visibility crosswalks already out there on the street. So that's kind of what the challenge looks like to us. We'll talk for a few minutes about what it means to coordinate and what that looks like from within MTA and within the implementing agencies. So at MTA, we are trying to manage a number of high priority investment programs at the same time. We have Vision Zero with a high crash corridor map. We have the Muni Forward program, and we still have the build out of the bicycle plan. So all of these programs affect many of the same streets. And it's really important that when we touch a street, we're making all the improvements that we have programmed. We're meeting all of our priorities for that street. So before we begin to scope a project and go down the path towards engineering and design, we're now requiring that all of our project managers communicate with one another better, coordinate and checklist all of their projects and all the scope of their projects against not just the specific priorities that they're there to implement. So the bike planners aren't just checking against the bike network, they're also checking against the Muni Forward network and the high crash network, so that all the transportation priorities are reflected in their scope. If the project is on the high entry network, meaning if it is a project that's targeted for action via Vision Zero, regardless of whether the project is initially funded through one of our Vision Zero funding sources, we have a required internal coordination process that we've now put in place to make sure that when that project is executed, all the pedestrian and traffic safety scope that's needed to help us achieve Vision Zero is built into and baked into the project. And so this goes far beyond the 24 key projects that we began to...
Mr. Mayor, can I just sort of following up on what you just mentioned in terms of internal processes both within the MTA and among departments,
yes,
particularly between MTA and DPW. can you just be a little more specific about how you're ensuring that we don't have these sort of delays and bottlenecks? And I know you and I have talked about some of these issues, for example, at the Bosworth Diamond intersection project, which has really dragged on for a very long time. And I know that much of that predated your tenure, and I know you're doing a lot of really good work to try to address some of the process issues, which we all appreciate. But can you talk a little more specifically about how the MTA is really going to be improving the process?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's probably two areas that are important here. Number one is getting the scope right the first time, and that may mean investing some time up front in making sure that both the stakeholders within the MTA and also our partner agencies like Public Works and the PUC are at the table, so that we're not proceeding with an incomplete design and then having to go back to square one when we realize that we've overlooked an important challenge. So we need to get the scope and the design right up front, get all the people at the table. And then as the project evolves through the design, the public outreach, the legislation, and the implementation process, we have a schedule of regular check-ins, especially with Public Works, which is so important to the actual delivery of our projects. So we meet biweekly with Public Works at the staff and management level to do a deep dive and troubleshoot the schedule for all the Vision Zero projects. So that's the approach we're using to keep the first 24 projects on track. We also have a management level meeting with both Public Works and Caltrans quarterly to look more programmatically at are we falling off the critical path with any of our projects.
And in terms of who is actually physically delivering the projects, I know for a long time it was pretty common for MTA to do the design and approval and then hand it off to DPW to deliver.
Right.
I know with, for example, Bosworth and Diamond, and I just raised that because it's a recent example, MTA decided it was going to deliver that internally, initially not to involve DPW at all. Right. Eventually the agency relented and allowed DPW to at least help deliver part of the project. And as I've mentioned to you, the Castro Street project, which is a dramatically bigger, more complicated, more disruptive, more difficult project, was delivered more quickly than Bosworth and Diamond, which is one relatively small intersection project. And so just curious what the agency's intentions are in terms of who will physically be delivering these projects.
So our intention is that we will deliver Vision Zero projects through a mix of Public Works and our own in-house capital program. When you think about Vision Zero and Muni Forward and the continued build out of the bike plan, our on-street capital program is growing. It's much bigger than it was a few years ago, and we think it's really important that we have as many different avenues to deliver as possible.
Yeah, and we have seen some examples where the MTA, I think, has done a really good job of delivering some projects, not necessarily Vision Zero, but different transit or pedestrian projects in a more efficient manner. So there are certainly always more positive examples. Do you see that in terms of just the internally at MTA, with for those projects where MTA will deliver them, do you see improvement happening in terms of how the agency goes about doing that?
Yeah, and maybe this is a good time for me to talk about how we're investing in some of the people who will be charged with this delivery, because I think there does need to be a little bit of a culture change and a raised expectation that we do need to be doing more, better, faster within MTA if we're going to reach the Vision Zero goal. So over the last 6 weeks, we've trained 60 MTA staff people. These are project managers, mid-level managers, in an intense 2-day project management training course, which they took alongside their colleagues from SFCTA. The idea there is to, first of all, bring everyone's project management skills up to prepare for the rollout of what we call CPCS, which is our capital project control system. I think it's really great that MTA and TA staff are taking this training together so that the two agencies are speaking the same language, and that some of the missteps that that could potentially occur during the funding and programming phase are smoothed out by that common understanding of what a project scope and a project schedule look like. The other exciting thing is we just announced last week that we're going to be bringing on a high-level manager, a project delivery director who will be reporting directly to me and whose job will be to re-engineer and streamline the project delivery process across the entire Sustainable Streets division. I think this will result in streamlined processes, shortened timelines, and it'll help me help me and my colleagues reach that goal of delivering more, better, faster. So regardless of the delivery, the ultimate construction, let's say which construction arm we're using, whether it's Public Works, our own capital program, or a mix of the two, the improved project management training, the capital program controls, the new systems we're putting in place, and a single point of accountability for project delivery are really going to help us streamline this process.
Great, that sounds really positive.
A couple other things that I'll mention briefly is we've launched an online interactive map, www.visionzerosf.com. This displays a dashboard of current projects, their status. You can look at them on a map and pull up interactive information about their schedule and timeline. We also have been getting great support from our partners at Public Works through their Invista system, where it's a map-based platform for project coordination where contractors, city agencies, non-city agencies can go and find out about what kind of projects are scheduled, and gives those folks an opportunity to coordinate a little better with us. It's been a great tool in our conversations among the agencies. It's also been a great way to engage Caltrans, with whom we meet quarterly to ensure that things like design review, environmental clearance, and the construction permits that are very important on the state highways within the city are moving as smoothly as possible. So I think I guess what I'd like to sort of leave you with on the project delivery question is that this is definitely a work in progress. I would not stand here and pretend that we have this down pat. I know there have been problems in the past, and we're still struggling with some of these issues today. But the way we're attacking is to improve project coordination, get the scoping, scheduling, and budgeting right the first time, put better processes in place, and to really staff up, both by hiring the staff who can be accountable for this kind of thing, but also by training and empowering the staff we have to really understand the role in the project.
I also have a question about soft costs. Is that something that the agency tracks in terms of the portion of these projects that are the so-called soft costs?
By soft costs, what do you mean exactly?
Yeah, the costs that are not the sort of the physical costs of implementing the project. I think we've heard about in some of these projects, some of the soft costs can be as much as a third of the project budget. And there's always going to be some soft costs. Of course, you can't build a project without all the planning and the preparation. But it can also mean that you have less money available for the actual physical work. So I'm just wondering how the MTA tracks that and how it compares with other cities and so forth.
So we do track that, and we track that in a variety of ways, most of which are related to the source of funding we're using to build the project. So as I think you've probably heard at our previous hearings, we use a whole variety of funding sources. Prop K, we use federal discretionary grants, we use Prop B and now Prop A money, and each of those has different reporting requirements. So we are tracking soft costs. We're tracking the staff hours needed to design, perform public outreach, reach environmental clearance. I couldn't stand here today and tell you that exactly 21 or exactly 14% of our construction cost is what you're calling soft costs. But again, as we migrate to this new capital program control system platform, we'll be in a much better position to track those things not only on a project basis where we're tracking them today, but across the whole program to start to actually look at the patterns, find ways to find efficiencies that you really need to look at across the whole program of projects to track. So again, like I said, that's also a work in progress.
So do you think we'll start seeing some improvements in terms of reducing the soft costs?
I think this year we'll see improvements in reducing soft costs, but what I don't know now is even what the baseline we're working from is.
Okay.
So
Thank you very much. I believe Supervisor Kim may have a question.
That's correct. Supervisor Kim?
Yeah, good to see you here. And I know that I ask you these hard questions all the time about, how we can make project delivery move as quickly as possible, given that, these are clearly needs that are impacting our pedestrians and cyclists today. And one of the examples that I had asked you to talk about earlier was, how Folsom Street Bike Lane, the pilot, had moved so quickly after the death of Amelie Lamulak, and how, the Howard Bike Lane, which was supposed to be a paired Vision Zero project, took almost another year and a half to begin implementation. By the way, I'm so happy that it's, the paint is in place, and I got to see it. And so I was hoping you could talk about not to actually focus on Howard Street, because, you came back and talked about the wiring, the overhead wiring from Muni, which can provide another level of challenge in project delivery. But I guess the question for me is, when I see projects come into place without seeming like it had the process that other projects do, the example being the Folsom Street Bike Lane,
Right.
and the second actually being the scramble signal on Sacramento and Stockton, I have to ask the question, well, how did you get it done in those instances? So let's focus on the positive times when MTA has been able to deliver projects, it feels like in 2 months or less, in response often to a fatality, right?
Right.
So how are you able to expedite those projects then, and what prevents us from doing that more frequently?
Okay. I think a couple of important things in your question. Number one, we did Folsom Street as a pilot. There's a difference between a pilot and a permanent program. Generally, when we make these changes, we like to go to our MTA board for approval of the traffic and parking changes once and for all. We don't go through all that effort just to do a pilot. We try not to take a huge number of projects through the pilot avenue, because it's important that we respect the CEQA process and the public outreach process that we've committed to. And finally, the pedestrian scramble signals. That's not something that requires a detailed level of environmental review in the way removing a lane of traffic on Folsom, on Howard Street, would. So I don't want to blame the environmental process for slow project delivery, but it's an important hurdle we need to move through, and it doesn't apply to every project. So I think the scramble signals are a good example of a project that a brief engineering study is all we really need to do to make that happen.
My understanding, though, is that and correct me if I'm wrong about this, because I wasn't as involved on Stockton Street as some other folks were, but that there was some reluctance to put a scramble signal there until the fatality had occurred. So the scramble system was put in place in 2002 from Clay up to Pacific. Mm-hmm. And my understanding is that there had been requests to put it on Sacramento and a reluctance to do so. And then it went in very quickly after the death of the pedestrian. And I don't want to sound like I'm, accusing MTA of this, but it feels like, from a general public's perspective that doesn't work in the department, that it takes a fatality to get a project into place faster. And that, if a layperson said to me, well, if Amelie was killed on Howard Street, I bet Howard Street would have happened immediately, not Folsom. I'm not saying that that is true. It's just the appearance. I guess how can we ensure that we're moving swiftly on all projects and we're not waiting for a fatality to motivate something to get put in place?
So I think the answer is to move much more swiftly on all projects.
Okay.
And everything I mentioned earlier about putting better processes in place and empowering the staff across all the different agencies to be focused on that more, better, faster approach to delivery, rather than to focus perhaps on some of the constraints that we've perhaps put on ourselves, but also faced from outside the MTA over the years. So I think the answer I would give is that I want to get to a point where we're moving much faster through the design and design legislation and environmental processes.
So then this is just my last question. and I apologize because I didn't give all these questions to you in advance, so I appreciate that you're answering them on the fly. This came up recently with 340 Bryant, the appeal that the Board of Supervisors heard last Tuesday, and actually ultimately what the residents and neighborhood wanted was they wanted a signalized crosswalk because it's a freeway entrance, and it just seemed ripe for an injury or a fatality. And I know that there was some resistance because the crosswalk would largely just support this one building on SFMTA's part to fund it and maintain it. And so the project sponsor then agreed to pay for, and it took some time to get there, but the project sponsor then agreed to pay for the signalized crosswalk. It took a little bit of pressure, but it happened. And the response that we then got from SFMTA is that normally it would take us a minimum of 18 months if we had to design it. But now that the project sponsor is going to pay for the design it, and pay for the cost of the installation, it's still going to take 12 months. And I guess I just want to understand why, because the building's opening in September, our residents are worried. They allowed the appeal to, they took away some of the opposition to the appeal. But, why does it take 12 months if someone else is paying for it, will do the design work, environmental review is not the issue? How can we get those projects in the ground faster?
Okay, so I don't have the specific details of why it's still 12 months on 340 Bryant, but we can get back to you on that. The signal contracts, which are a big part of the Vision Zero project delivery, that's going to be something that we're going to take a hard look at with this with my new project delivery director. That's the best answer I've got for you.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, looks like we have no further comments or questions for you. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Why don't we go ahead and go to public comment on item number 5? Before you speak, sir, just want to remind you that your public comment is only limited to the items discussed in item number 5. Please, if there are any member of the public that would like to speak on this item, please come forward.
Good afternoon, Supervisor Scalvino, Supervisor Jane Kim, Supervisor Michael Han. I know on June 1st, the secretary for the exhibition, Supervisor Lian Yi, for his trial court day. I mean, I was here, seeing Gavin Newsom and along with Lian Yi, 15, 20 years ago, in the City Hall, public meetings. I was there already, as a guest, citizen guest, people. So I've written lots of written the essay chapter to secure people importance in public position, destiny. So, but all those are in Chinese essay chapter writings. See, if we can be translated on the English, so I think we definitely can secure most people's position of destiny for one's lifespans in the future. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any other member of the public that would like to talk about or comment on item number 5, a hearing on Vision Zero and street safety? Okay. Seeing none, public comment is closed. Thank you very much. Supervisor Wiener, what shall we do?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank you again for scheduling this hearing. I want to thank the MTA for its presentation. I do want to compliment the agency. I mean, we have a lot of challenges around street design projects and project delivery and so forth, and it's been an ongoing challenge for many years. I do believe that the MTA is making some positive strides in moving us towards better and faster project delivery. I mean, there are really two major categories there. The really, really big projects like Van Ness BRT, where we just see the process going on for way too long, and we have very lengthy environmental clearance and a lot of community process, which is important, but sometimes we don't do a good job of saying what the beginning and the end of that community process is. But for these smaller projects where they are not particularly complicated projects and often not even controversial projects, but they are projects that will save lives. It is important that we move forward quickly with them, and I do see progress being made, and I want to acknowledge that. And I look forward to continuing to have this public conversation with the agency and make sure we move in a positive direction. And so with that, Madam Chair, I move that we continue this item to the call of the chair.
Thank you very much. Seeing that item is seconded by Supervisor Kim, motion made by Supervisor Weiner. Without objection, this motion passes to the full board. Positive recommendation.
No. Call of the chair. Call of the chair.
Excuse me, to the call of the chair.
Sorry, yeah, to the call of the chair. Supervisor Weiner wants.
Yes,
yes,
the motion
continue
to
call of the
file to the call of the chair. Okay. Thank you.
Not filed, it's just call of the chair. So,
continue.
Yeah.
We'd like to
continue to the call of the chair.
Call of the chair. Yes, right.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Madam Clerk, let's go back to item number 4. Supervisor Campos is here with us, and he is the project, or not the project sponsor, but the sponsor for today's item.
Item number 4 is an ordinance amending the administrative code to modify the calculation for relocation payments to evicted tenants.
Thank you. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Land Use Committee, to my colleagues for hearing this item. As you know, in October of last year, U.S. District Court Judge Stephen Breyer stayed my relocation assistance ordinance, which was passed by this board by a supermajority. Respectfully, I believe that Judge Breyer was wrong. Nevertheless, what we have before us today is the introduction of a revised ordinance to address the concerns that have been raised by Judge Breyer. You have copies of the amended ordinance, and if passed by the Board of Supervisors, this amended ordinance would still be subject to Judge Breyer's stay. However, we are submitting this because we believe that passage of this ordinance would enhance or strengthen the City Attorney's appeal before the Ninth Circuit. The ordinance increases relocation assistance for tenants evicted under the Ellis Act to give evicted tenants a fighting chance to continue to live in San Francisco. The current relocation assistance amounts are simply too low, and what it means when you're evicted is that it essentially leads to these tenants, once eviction happens, being forced out of the city. Before us today, this ordinance, as amended, makes the following changes. 1, it caps the relocation assistance at $50,000, which before there was no cap. 2nd, it requires tenants to use the relocation assistance payment on replacement housing, moving costs, or for other costs that are incurred to mitigate the negative impact on the tenants when faced with eviction. And finally, it actually specifies the method that the controller would use to estimate the market cost of an apartment. This is something that the prior ordinance did not do. In addition, today I would like to introduce some additional minor amendments at the request of the Rent Board, and these are the following. Substituting the actual date of February 19, 2005 for the effective date of ordinance amendments on page 6. Specifying that the controller will use real facts publication for the prior calendar year instead of the most current publication or posting. That's on page 8, lines 20 to 24. Using the more accurate term, quote, tenants of the unit as of the date their landlord files the notice of intent to withdraw rental units, end quote, instead of simply tenants in a unit, and that's on page 9, lines 18 through 21. Specifying the time within which relocation payments would be made following submission of the declaration. The prior amendment was silent, implying within a reasonable period of time. And that, by the way, is on pages 10 through 11, lines 10 to 25, and then on page 11, lines 1 to 3. Making the correction that now specifies that certain tenants would be paid the greater of the relocation payment or the traditional payment, reduced by payments received in subsection 37.9a E3AD, whereas formerly the ordinance incorrectly identified only tenants subject to the greater relocation payment, and that's on page 11, line 25, as well as page 12, lines 1 to 3. I respectfully ask for your support of these amendments, of these changes, to take into account the court's ruling and to enhance our standing with the appeal before the Ninth Circuit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Supervisor Campos. Let's take public comment on this item now. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak on item number 4? If so, please come up. 2 minutes to speak. Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed on this. Is there a motion on this item, Supervisor Campos?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make if the committee could make a motion to amend along the lines that I outlined, and then once amended, to move the item forward. Okay,
Supervisor Weiner has something to say?
No, I'll move the amendments.
Oh, okay. All right, so motion has been made, amendments have been made by Supervisor Campos, seconded by Supervisor Weiner.
No, I'll make the motion because Supervisor Campos isn't a member of the committee.
Thank you. Supervisor Campos is not a member of the committee, so he can't make a motion, but Supervisor Weiner will make that motion. And Supervisor Kim has indicated support and will second that motion. This amendment passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, Supervisor Campos, for joining us today.
The recommendation.
And Madam Clerk, Madam Chair, if you can move on the amended item to move it forward. If you could approve.
Motion made to move with recommendation by Supervisor Kim and seconded by Supervisor Weiner. This motion passes. Thank you. Madam Clerk, is there any other business before this committee?
Madam Chair, there's no further business.
Thank you very much. This committee is closed.